someone who's got the pulse of this town as well as any, and that is our next guest, Nick Haines, Kansas City PBS, joining us on KCMO, now on the FM dial at 95.7 FM. So, Nick, outside of KCMO Talk Radio getting this 100,000-watt FM flamethrower, what are the top stories in Kansas City as you look back on this year?
Well, let's just look back at just a little bit and say, boy, this should have been an A-plus amazing banner year. We host the NFL draft for the very first time. We get national attention on us because of that. We also win a Super Bowl, a huge deal for Kansas City, of course, and we open a brand new single terminal at KCI Airport on time, which we can't really just take for granted. You remember Denver Airport was almost 2 years late in opening, $2 billion over budget. So those are major accomplishments. But I think we have to take down the grade because we had these problems, these persistent problems we simply were plagued with all year long and we couldn't solve. One of them is, of course, the crime issue. We are still on pace to be the deadliest year on record in Kansas City. And after all of the talk, all of the meetings and claims we're doing something differently, we simply didn't find a viable plan to reduce that tragic murder count. And the other, of course, is the stadium issue. Oh, my goodness. I have viewers, and I'm sure you have listeners, Pete, who are suffering from stadium fatigue. It has been relentless turn of the screw, and yet how much wiser are we today than when we started the year about where the Royals are going to end up? And now we've even got the Chiefs up in the air.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, those are two excellent points. A lot of good, but a lot of really bad as well. And the homicide issue is certainly top of the list. Now, I was told, Nick, that once that pesky former police chief Rick Smith got out of here, everything was going to be rainbows and roses, and people would start trusting the police again, and people would stop killing each other, and that hasn't happened. So what do you think that means for 2024 and where this conversation goes?
Well, first of all, not one individual can transform an entire major multifaceted issue in a city like this, and clearly the police chief can't do that by herself. One thing that still remains an issue for all the talk too is that the Kansas City Police Department is still about 300 officers short of where we were prior to the COVID pandemic. We have a criminologist who always writes in and talks to me, who is in our area, who says, one of the things we always have to remember is that consistency and certainty of sentencing is much more important than the severity of the sentence. So if you don't think anything's going to happen to you, regardless of what the laws are, or you don't think you have much chance of getting caught, you're going to continue to commit those crimes. And that's what we're seeing now, even though so many cities, including Detroit just in the last week, saying they're reaching historic lows in their murder rates this year. And yet we are one of those outliers that simply can't get that together. So yes, you will hear again about the police board and why Kansas City is, woo us because we don't control our own police department. But you'll notice, I think a lot of that is now rhetoric. I don't think anything is going to change there. And you have a mayor with eyes set on some other office or some other place in the next 12 to 24 months.
Ooh, that's good. That's very interesting. So you think Quentin Lucas in the next 12 to 24 months, after just getting reelected this year, is heading out of town somewhere?
I do believe that, yes. And you think about it, my view was that Emmanuel Cleaver would decide he's going to be 80 years old next year. We've seen all the trends. There are more than 40 members of the House and Senate nationally who've decided, we're going to give it up. We're going to hang up our hats. They've had enough. And was this the time for him to do so? He has said he's going to continue on. We'll watch for that. But this could be his last term. That would still allow Quentin Lucas to come in. But that would be the last year of his office where he'd have to give up that office to take that seat. And I know he still has a very great interest in being in Congress.
So you think that's his next move. But here's the thing. Emmanuel Cleaver, like you said, is going to be 80. I mean, heck, these days in Congress, he's just hitting his stride.
I love it, Pete, which is why when I go, whether it be to the Martin City Brewery or to Costco, people say, hey, I love it when Pete Mundo's on your program. It is true. He is just hitting his stride. What is he going to do next? But I think that's a certain possibility for Quinton Lucas to move effortlessly into that position. Now, of course, his position for a national position is all going to be predicated on whether a Democrat continues to be in the White House. Clearly, in the next few months, next 12 months, we'll find out whether that's the case. And that might dry up any opportunities to be in a national political job in a administration.
Nick Haines, Kansas City PBS, is on KCMO 95.7 FM. It's always good to have him here as we look back on the year that was in Kansas City. You know, you mentioned a lot of good things. Jackson County, we've now seen the Attorney General file a lawsuit against Jackson County. To me, this is one of those stories that could end up being one of our biggest stories in 2024, Nick, depending on how it plays out with Jackson County. Where does that factor in to what you think the next year looks like in this town?
Yeah, you're actually hitting something there that I think is actually one of the most interesting stories of the last year that will play out into next year. And that is what we've seen is this total, that we've lost this camaraderie and cooperation on the Missouri side of state line. It's clearly happening between City Hall and the county legislature and one Frank White. We saw it on the Jackson County assessment issue now playing out, as you mentioned, the talk that, all of these validations are not valued. That's going to be played out now in the courts for quite some time. So this is going to be a lingering issue. But if you remember, first of all, on that issue, it was Jackson County Executive Frank White telling Mayor Lucas, stop butting in on this in a much more diplomatic way, of course, because Quinton Lucas was complaining about the process too. Frank White didn't like that. We saw that playing out, of course, also on the stadium issue, where there seemed to be some bad blood between Frank White and Quinton Lucas on that issue. And the other one is the jail. And as we start this brand spanking new year coming up, we are having Kansas City, Missouri and Jackson County moving forward with separate jails, possibly just a couple of miles from one another. What does that say to taxpayers? Because they couldn't come together and agree on anything. So I think that cooperation issue, that collaboration is something to watch there. It is. We saw, I think, in my time, I've been doing this for almost 30 years in Kansas City. I found it to be one, that people are doing this in a much more public fashion, and disagreeing like that is very new.
Well, these are fascinating times. You mentioned 30 years doing this, Nick Haines. I mean, when you factor in all the high of the highs, the NFL draft, the Super Bowl, the low of the lows, the homicides, the stadiums, throw in a little Taylor Swift. And you tell me, Nick, 30 years, is this as interesting a time as there's been to cover Kansas City as a region, or is there something else that sticks out?
Well, I always think, first of all, it's wonderful to be in the media in this community, because if it's boring on one side of state line, you've always got something else on the other. So we've always got something interesting to talk about, and that's what happens, and that is perfect. I think one thing that we sometimes forget is the sort of momentum we have seen as a city. I think Kansas City really has had an inferiority complex. I say that as an outsider who came here from the shores of Britain back in the late 80s, and this feeling that other cities are better. But boy, we have got basically so many things here now today, momentum in so many different areas, a brand new airport, the Taylor Swift deal. I'm not a huge fan of her music. I'm not a huge fan of the Chiefs. I'm not one of those. I'm the least tribal person you're going to meet. But boy, this has brought an international attention to Kansas City that I don't think we've ever seen. We're on the map in a much bigger way than we've ever been. And, even where on our corner of the world where I live here at the television station at 31st and Main, basically, which was always not a terrific part of town, ramshackle, a lot of homeless living there. Now, I mean, every time I come to work, there is something brand new opening, little businesses. It is kind of amazing the kind of momentum the city has right now.
Well, everyone wants to have their business right down the street from the great Nick Haines, who we have confirmed is not a Swiftie, but covers the news as well as anybody in this community. Nick, we're grateful for your time. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll talk to you in 2024, my friend. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you, and happy holidays. Merry Christmas to all of your terrific listeners.
There you go. The best. Nick Haines, good to have him on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM.